Hello everyone, welcome to the session. My name is Pyung-wook Cho. I'm a product manager in WebLogic Server team, which is a part of Oracle Cloud Application Foundation Group. In this presentation, I'm going to introduce a new exciting feature called Managed Coherence Server in upcoming WebLogic 12.1.2 release. I'm going to start by giving you a quick introduction on coherence for those who may not be familiar with it. After that, I will walk you through the integration effort we've been working on to bring WebLogic and Coherence together. Coherence is essentially an in-memory data grid. Many Oracle customers have a common challenge in their IT infrastructure. Applications are hosted in middleware servers, and data sits in the backend database systems or other servers. As the workload grows, customers tended to see the bottleneck between middleware and the data sources, and this is where coherence can be really valuable. Coherence allows you to scale your application in a cost-effective way by reducing backend load within memory caching. You can also increase the application performance because the applications can access the data from the cache instead of having to go all the way to the backend systems. You will see a better reliability as well, as Coherence can continue to make the data available in the cache when the backend system might go down temporarily. Here are some of the common use cases for Coherence. You can use Coherence for data caching. You can access the data objects and look at each properties and state from the data grid instead of backend data stores. You can also use Coherence for data analytics. You can ask questions over the data objects hosted in Coherence. Likewise, you can perform some computations over the data objects, such as finding the aggregate information. For example, you can find the average salary information for all the employee objects that are cached in Coherence. You can also define event processing mechanism so that applications can take some actions when the objects are cached, or they get expelled, or they get updated. Oracle has been investing heavily in integrating Coherence with WebLogic. The first generation integration is what we call Active Cache, which was introduced in 11.1 release. If you are using WebLogic 11.1 and it includes Coherence 3.6 or 3.5 releases, and you can use this Active Cache. Active Cache consists of 4 main features. First off, you can use Coherence Web, which allows you to externalize your HTTP session objects. When you have stateful web applications, it is very common to have a bottleneck when you have a high number of concurrent HTTP sessions going on, and if your HTTP objects are sizable. Coherence can be used to store those HTTP session objects out of the JVM where WebLogic servers are running. You can also use standard dependency injection mechanism to create and access Coherence cache objects. You can use @resource annotation in your application. Active Cache relies on the WebLogic management infrastructure for cache configuration, lifecycle management. You can also monitor what's happening in Coherence clusters and each cache server. Lastly, if you are using TopLink, which is a JPA provider for WebLogic, Coherence can be used as a layer 2 caching for TopLink. In the upcoming release, now we are going even further to make a tighter integration between Coherence and WebLogic, and we call it Managed Coherence Servers. You can think of it as the second generation integration. The goal is to streamline your development and management environment when you are deploying distributed applications on WebLogic and Coherence. Managed Coherence Server introduces a new archive format for your application and is called Grid Archive, or GAR for short. It follows the standard Java EE model, such as Word over EL file. It allows you to consolidate all the cache configuration information into a single distributable entity. Just like a Word over EL file, GAR can be used to provide application isolation and lifecycle management of your application. Please note that GAR can be supported even for standalone Coherence servers. So if you prefer to use standalone Coherence server, you can continue to do so even in WebLogic 12.1.2 release. Managed Coherence Server leverages the core WebLogic management infrastructure, which provides the following benefit. You can think of a Coherence container as other WebLogic containers, such as EJB container, JMS container, and others. You can take advantage of standard management tools such as configuration wizard. For example, you can create a domain using Coherence configuration wizard with Coherence clusters pre-configured. Of course, you can continue to use WebLogic admin console or WLSD or Fusion Media Control to configure and monitor Coherence cache servers. Again, you can use GAR files to deploy your cache configurations, and we call it Coherence applications. The good old node managers can be used to start and stop managed Coherence servers, just like other regular WebLogic managed servers. One of the major differences between Active Cache in 11.1 and Managed Coherence Server in 12.1.2 is that the Coherence libraries now is a part of WebLogic system class path, which means that you do not need to package Coherence libraries in your applications anymore. Now with that, let's switch over to a live demo so that you can get a good sense how everything works together. I have two terminals here. I just started Node Manager so that we can start and stop WebLogic managed servers. In this tab, I have WebLogic admin server up and running. Let's go to the browser. And let's start configuring the necessary parts. So in this demo, I'm going to show you how to configure Managed Coherence servers. It takes just a couple of steps. First, you will need to configure Coherence cluster. After that, we're going to create a couple of managed servers, and we will make them a part of WebLogic clusters. We are going to have two WebLogic clusters, one for applications and second for the cache coherence cache servers. We are going to associate both WebLogic clusters with the coherence cluster we are going to create. And after that, we are going to deploy two applications. We are going to deploy guard file to the data tier WebLogic cluster, and we are going to deploy the application to the application cluster. And when everything is done, we will see whether the application works or not. So the first step is to create coherence cluster. Let me zoom it a bit so that you can see better. So there is a new menu item called coherence clusters in the left navigation bar. You can click new and let's name it coherence cluster. And you can, if you're familiar with it, you can choose to use either unicast or multicast for your coherence cluster. We'll pick unicast for this demo, and we'll set the port number to be 9000. And as you can see here, it allows you to actually pick WebLogic managed servers to be a part of this coherence cluster. We'll come back to this page later on after we create other WebLogic clusters and managed servers. And let's go to the servers and let's create managed servers. So it's app server 1. And the port number is 702, and we are done. And let's create one more, and this will be used as the cache server. And because everything runs on local, so we got to use different port numbers, obviously. So we are done, and let's go to the WebLogic clusters. Oh, before that, after you create the server, if you go to the server page, there is a new tab called Coherence. If you click it, then you will see that there is a drop-down box which allows you to pick which coherence cluster you want to use for this managed server if you want. If you want to use this as a part of coherence cluster. You can make the association here at the server page, or you can do so in the WebLogic cluster page, or you can do that in the coherence cluster page. So we'll go to the WebLogic cluster page, and then we'll create two WebLogic clusters. So let's name it as an app cluster, and let's create a new one, and this one we'll call it data cluster. And now for the app cluster, we are gonna add a server, and we'll use app server 1. And we are done, and we will use we'll add a server for the second cluster in the same way, and we'll pick data server 1. And just like on the server pages, if you go to the cluster page, you will see a new tab called Coherence. And if you click it, it's the same way. You can choose to configure coherence cluster if you are intending to use this WebLogic cluster to be a member of any coherence cluster you may have configured. So we are going to come back to this page later on. So once this is done, actually we can go to the coherence cluster page, and this is where you can add members. So now earlier we had only admin server. Now we have more servers after we create WebLogic clusters and managed servers. Now we are saying we are gonna add this to this coherence cluster. Boom, it's done. Now if you go back to the WebLogic cluster page or server page, so what you're gonna see is that under Coherence tab, now you see these two checkboxes popping up. Once this association happens, as you can see that association happens here, right? We did that in the Coherence cluster page. So now this is the Coherence cluster that we'll use. And once that association is done, then you can choose to enable or disable local storage. So in this case, this app cluster, this WebLogic cluster, we are going to use this to host the client application. We have a sample web application that will be part of Coherence cluster, but they are not going to cache the data. So what you're going to do is we are going to uncheck this box, meaning that the managed servers under this WebLogic cluster will access the data from the cache, but they will not be storing any data per se. So we save. And if you go to the second cluster, which is the data cluster, and again under the Coherence tab, now here, because we are going to use this second data cluster, this WebLogic cluster, to host managed coherence servers, so we need to leave this local storage enabled checked. Okay, so we're not going to do anything, so we can just save. Okay, so the next step is we are going to go to the deployment page and we're going to deploy two applications. Again, we are going to deploy the guard file, which has the cache config information. We are going to deploy it to the data tier. Let's go there and we'll select coherence guard. So, and we're going to deploy it to the data cluster. Okay, you remember this data cluster is a WebLogic cluster with the local storage enabled, and that's where you are deploying the guard deployment unit. As you can see, deploying guard files is exactly the same as deploying regular Word or ER file. Now we're going to deploy ER file to the second WebLogic cluster, meaning app cluster. Again, if you remember, we are using this WebLogic cluster to host this client application, the web application, and we disabled local storage for this WebLogic cluster. And finish. So the last step is we can go to the machines page and add the servers that we want to start using Node Manager. So we'll just pick this app server and app server 1, data server 1. I think we are all set. So let's go to the servers page and control, and let's select app server 1, data server 1, and we're going to start. So once the servers are up, then we can check the application status, and when they are active, we'll try to tap application. Yes, the servers are ready. So let's go and check whether applications are ready to accept the request. Okay, the state says active. So I think everything is all set now. So, and this is the application page. If you remember, the 702 was the listening port for the app server 1, right? So now this is simple application, and this button generates 20 random rows, and they are hosted in the data tier, which hosts Managed Coherence Servers. So this is the end of the demo, and let's go back to our presentation. So let me quickly summarize what we did so that you can conceptualize what is happening. Okay, so first off, so what is a grid archive file? So it again, grid grid archive, the GARD file is used to capture the caching information. So it has a structure which is very similar to the Java EE deployment module. So you have GARD deployment descriptor file called coherence application.xml, and you can have cache configuration, and if you're using POF, the portable object format, serialization, deserialization, then you can have the configuration here as well, and all other domain classes that are required for your coherence applications. As you may know, if you're familiar with the coherence, for advanced scenarios such as entry processing and other, if you want to do computation over data objects, then you need to have domain classes packaged inside the GARD file and any other additional libraries. A quick look into the coherence application XML file. Again, you can have a reference to the cache config here and POF config. And if you want to actually include a coherence lifecycle listener, then you can specify the name of the class here as well. GARD deployment can be done in many different ways. The .GARD file, they can be deployed to managed coherence servers that are meant to be used to host or to cache the data objects. So it's a standalone GARD deployment. For the client applications, whether you're using EAR file, then in that case, you can embed the same GARD file that you deploy to the data tier. You can embed the GARD file in your EAR file. If you have multiple modules, multiple loader files, or EJB jar, then actually you can have a single GARD file that can be shared among all this sub-deployment unit. Let me give you just a quick example on how you can use the Managed Coherence Server in terms of deployment. So what you can do is, okay, this blue solid line depicts WebLogic domain. So here you can create a coherence cluster. This black solid line, and you can configure a bunch of managed servers, as many as you want. In my demo, I just created one managed server for each WebLogic cluster because everything was running in my machine and I wanted to save some time. But in the real world scenario, you will have multiple managed servers you can configure for each WebLogic cluster. So typically, we recommend that you create separate WebLogic clusters in your domain, one for data tier with the storage enabled, meaning that for the managed servers here for this cluster, they are going to be used as the coherence cache servers. And as you can see, you deploy GARD files to those servers. In the second cluster, WebLogic cluster, again, you can have as many managed servers as you want. And the number of managed servers between these two WebLogic clusters, obviously, they don't have to match. So here, you can deploy your application, EAR file. You can deploy many different client applications. And for this WebLogic cluster, for your application, we recommend that you disable your local storage, meaning that these managed servers are not going to be used to cache the data, but they can still be a part of the same coherence cache cluster so that they can access the data that are cached by this managed coherence server. So here is the steps you can follow to create a coherence cluster. Managed coherence server. Again, step number 1, you configure a coherence cluster in your WebLogic domain, and you can create a WebLogic cluster with managed servers, and you set the storage enabled for that WebLogic cluster. And you can deploy the God file with appropriate cache configurations for your application. And for the second WebLogic cluster, you can set the storage disabled, and you can deploy EL file. And obviously, you need to associate both WebLogic clusters with the coherence cluster you created in step number 1. And after that, you are done. So this is the end of the presentation. I hope this was useful, and please give it a try. You will find it really powerful and useful. Thank you.